Good evening. We're starting with a workshop, and we have Director Hediger from Planning and Code here. Please, I guess, start with the first topic and take it from there.
Sure. So, as the mayor said, I'm David Hediger, the Director of Planning and Code Enforcement. So, new faces for a lot of people here, including myself. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is marijuana. So we've been talking about making a number of changes to our ordinance for probably a couple of years. We first adopted our ordinance in 2019, and it's been a learning curve for us as to how to administer that, how the state regulates it. The state is constantly changing their rules as well, so it's hard to keep up with them. And it's also hard to get a straight answer from the state as to how they regulate marijuana businesses. We've learned a lot over the last couple of years, and we've been slowly gathering our thoughts to make some changes to the ordinance. So, with that in mind, you folks do have a number of changes in front of you. I'm going to apologize in advance that it's going to be confusing, but I'll do my best and certainly ask me questions. At some point, I'm going to pull up a map here that maybe will help out the conversation. So right now, all of our marijuana provisions are in the licensing section of the Code of Ordinances. There's the Code of Ordinances, and then there's the Zoning and Land Use Code. So they're one document, but two different sections. Everything basically marijuana related is in the Code of Ordinances, with the exception of like where they can go. So it's different zoning districts, highway business, you can put a marijuana business, industrial, you can do that. But all of the other things as far as performance standards, like odor control, proximity to schools, proximities to other residential uses, things like that, they're all in the licensing section. That gets confusing for staff, gets confusing for applicants. That's one change that we want to make to improve things. So, in front of you, you have a section that breaks down the performance standards and puts them all in the Zoning and Land Use Code. And that's this document here. It says Appendix 12, Zoning and Land Use. That's where the performance standards go. And that's probably what I'm guessing the council will be most interested in. That's the section that has to do with setbacks to uses and whatnot. So that's one change that takes it from the Code of Ordinances, puts it in the Zoning and Land Use Code. Planning Board has jurisdiction over the Zoning and Land Use Code. Whenever amendments occur to the Zoning and Land Use Code, it has to go to the Planning Board, and then it comes back to you folks. The Planning Board has acted on that Article 12. It provided a favorable recommendation. There was discussion about it, about the number of establishments, but that's part of the reason why we're here, is to get a sense from the council as to whether or not you think we have maybe too many establishments, that the rules are adequate, or maybe we should be providing more opportunities for marijuana businesses. So that's the first big change, and I'll go a little more into detail with this as we move along. In your document, the Chapter 22, the business licensing section, there isn't a lot of changes to that. That's basically updates to definitions to make sure we're still consistent with the state, because the state is continually changing their definitions. There's new bills every session that are being proposed. Some get acted upon, some don't. So trying to keep up to speed with the state is largely what we're doing with the definition section in there. There is some language in there with respect to appeals that I'll touch upon at some point, as well as how quickly a license should be issued. A big change that we want to talk about to clean things up is how we measure things. And let me go to, folks have this in your packet, but it'll help maybe everybody out. If you go to that map with all the circles on it, it's on the screen right now as well. The way we measure setbacks for marijuana businesses right now is defined by the ordinary course of travel, and that was language that exists in our ordinance right now for setbacks from adult businesses and drinking establishments. My understanding is that language was originally done for downtown and to try to curb the number of drinking establishments and adult businesses that were in the downtown back in the 80s and 90s. And we took that language and applied it to marijuana businesses 3 or 4 years ago. It's absolutely problematic when you're outside of an urban environment or a downtown environment, because what is the ordinary course of travel? We debate this with marijuana businesses all the time, is are you working at a right angle, are you going down to the crosswalk, are you using the sidewalk? The state measures it basically as the crow flies, which is a much easier way to do things. So you go from the property line, it's a setback of whatever, 500, 1,000, 750 feet, whatever the number is, as the crow flies from the marijuana business to the property that you want to protect. So that's one change that we absolutely want to make. The planning board acted upon that as well. So that makes it easier for staff, that makes it easier for the applicant, makes it easy for property owners. They all can figure out what the ordinary course of travel is. We've had some businesses try to get around that ordinary course of travel by putting up a fence. So in order to meet the setback, oh, I'll just make the people walk a little bit further and we'll put up a fence so they have to go around the fence now. We could have permitted that. In fact, we may have permitted a couple like that, but it's terrible. It's not a good way. I mean, they're clearly getting around the ordinance. We regulate setbacks from schools, as does the state. The state allows municipalities to go as little as 500 feet. We're currently at 700 feet, but again, the measurement is different, right? The state was measuring as the crow flies. We were measuring ordinary course of travel. So we're proposing now to go 500 feet as the ordinary course, as a buffer from the property line. We chose 500 feet because that's probably a more consistent number with the 750 that already exists. So if you can measure 750 ordinary course of travel, you're kind of wandering around potentially on a walkway or a sidewalk to get that 750 versus as the crow flies, the distance is shorter then, right? So the thought was, if the ordinance is working from a setback perspective, let's keep that distance somewhat relative, and we felt 500 feet is somewhat relative to 750, if that makes sense. What Lewiston does that's above and beyond the state is we regulate setbacks from daycares and childcare facilities as well. So the state only regulates schools, we do childcare facilities. That was something that the council specifically wanted to see happen back in 2019, or 2018 actually. We also regulate distances from school, playgrounds, parks, any of those. We have a specific list that's actually in your ordinance of regulated parks and playgrounds that we regulate setbacks from for marijuana businesses as well. So we're more restrictive than the state in that case. Where I guess this image, where I'm looking for some guidance from you folks, really is about these buffers. You should be looking at this this map, and you should also be looking at this page in your ordinance here, the table that has the setbacks on it. It shows what's being proposed. Everything that's struck out is essentially new language. And then the fourth column on the right side is the existing standards to try to provide some clarification here. And I guess I'd like to focus on this and try to get a sense from the council as to what direction we might like to go in. Keeping in mind that the planning board was okay with this, but what the planning board did have concerns was, are there too many establishments? And if the council thinks that there are too many establishments, then this table will likely change, and depending on how much you folks would like to see it change, we may need to go back to the planning board.
Excuse me,
Sure.
Director, can you repeat what you said? The planning board was not concerned about the number of establishments?
They were. They were. Yeah, that question came up. A couple business owners, licensed business owners in the community were saying, geez, there's already a lot of establishments in town. How many does Lewiston need? Good question. The planning board heard that and said, well, that's fair enough, but because they're licensed establishments, maybe the council should be weighing into that as to whether or not we should be changing anything. So again, they don't really have the planning board doesn't have jurisdiction over licensing, so that's why we're kind of having this discussion in addition to it being confusing and trying to give you folks a heads up as to what's being discussed here. So again, if you look at the table, first row, pre-existing schools, childcare, parks, facilities, that's either the same or more strict than the state as far as what the protected use is. We're proposing 500 feet. It's currently 750 feet, but again, the way that it's being measured is changing. So 750 was the ordinary course of travel. We're proposing a 500-foot buffer now. Next one, any two marijuana stores, 250 feet, and it's from the main entrance of the store to the next main entrance. So basically, you can have two marijuana businesses next to each other, but the third establishment has to be 250 feet away from any of those other establishments. Again, we originally measured that as 500 feet along the ordinary course of travel, and people were, not pretending, but they were, well, I'll put up a fence, Dave, and I'll get around the setback then, and I'll get the distance you're looking for. The last one is pre-existing dwelling in a residential zoning district. And it says 50 feet, and that would be for the buffer line from the main entrance of the dwelling to any portion of the marijuana business, and existing is 300 feet. If there's something that I have concern about, I haven't given this more thought since we talked with the planning board, it's this last row. And I don't think it works the way it's written. So now if we look at the map, I can give you some examples, and if you can, does a mouse show up there? Good, mouse shows up. So this is on Lisbon Street. As an example, what I'm circling here was the old Napa building on Lisbon Street, if people know where that is. Sam's is across the street. This blue line here is the zoning line. So everything on the bottom side of this is zoned residential, neighborhood conservation A. Everything on the top side of that line is highway business, community business, is a non-residential zoning district. We allow marijuana businesses in the community business district. That would be appropriate. It's a retail type use, so we allow retail establishments in there. So the way we would measure that now, if you look at this circle here, 300 feet along the ordinary course of travel. So right now, if their door was here as an example, what's the ordinary course of travel? Well, for this conversation, I'm like, okay, it's a right angle, it's another right angle, they're going down, and oh, okay, it's the front door of this house here. Let's say it wasn't 350, they put up a fence here and they just make themselves go around the fence so they have to walk. It's just problematic. It's not a good way to administer it. Not only that, but we're measuring to the front door of this house. We haven't had this argument yet, but somebody could say, that's not the main entrance of my house. The main entrance is the side. So many people use the side. How many people use their front door? So the language that's in your ordinance in that third column is, or third row, is 50 feet. 50 feet is literally this circle right here. And that's problematic too. Again, it's 50 feet from the property line of the residents in a residential district. From their door, I don't want to have a discussion with a property owner and say, where's your front door? Great, let's draw a 50-foot circle around it. It's a problem. I don't want to get into a discussion with any property owner and debate where their front door is or what their main entrance is. So the question is, and it consistent with other state provisions, again, like the state regulates from the protected use. For example, the school, it's anywhere from 1,000 feet, well, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 feet from the property line of a school. We thought we'd do the same here. So again, this is above and beyond what the state requires. The state doesn't regulate from a zoning perspective. They don't regulate from a residential use or anything like that. The last council had concerns, so keeping that in mind, we said, great, we still want to regulate from a residential use. Let's regulate from the property that's being protected. So the property protected is this black and white dashed line. That's the residential use in a residential zoning district. What's an appropriate buffer from that? Red is 50 feet. Okay. If this is our marijuana business, no portion within the 50-foot buffer can be used. Okay, so they can't use this little shed or whatever it is out back, but they can use the rest of this for our marijuana business. And to be clear, that's how the state interprets it as well. Or at least that's our understanding based upon conversations with them. If your buffer line goes through a building, the state says, whatever's within the buffer you can't use, but anything that's outside the buffer you can use. I don't know how well that gets administered, but that's the interpretation. I think 50 feet's pretty shallow. So as an example, here's 100 feet. So this green line is the 100-foot buffer. So again, this building, probably we wouldn't be a marijuana business then, right? Because I mean, there's probably just say 10 feet along the front of this building that could theoretically be used as a marijuana business. That's not realistic. This is a much easier way for property owners, for staff, for applicants to know whether or not a property can be used as a marijuana business. And by moving this into the zoning and land use section, we can advise people early on. What they do now is they apply for a license, and that license will sit in the clerk's office for months potentially, because the first thing they want to know is, can I buy or lease this piece of property? Everything else is easy for them, right? Everything else is money. It's building permits, it's odor control, it's signs, it's electrical, it's things that they can potentially address by spending money, but they can't fix a buffer issue if they go out and buy something and all of a sudden they find out I'm too close to a school or a daycare or some other type of use. So the question for you folks is really what you have in front of you here specifically. I mean, you may have concerns that I'd be interested in knowing about, but the concerns that staff has is this last row here, this 50 feet. It should be reworded. I would suggest that it should be either the red or the green line, protecting the residential use in a residential zoning district. I will throw out there that depending on how restrictive the council wants to be, something to keep in mind, and I can try to show this quickly for those that aren't totally familiar with our zoning yet, but you will over time here. All these thick blue lines are our zoning districts, and this is the area that we were just looking at. This is Lisbon Street right here, and you can see it's pretty narrow in spots. It's narrow throughout this whole section until you get out by exit 80, and then it kind of opens up. This is Sabatis Street. Super narrow, again, commercial corridor. It's narrow almost all the way up to Sabatis. This is Main Street. It's kind of narrow, gets a little wider when you're up by Martin's and whatnot. My point in talking about the narrowness of it is depending on how restrictive you want to be, and you go back to this map here, you make that buffer greater than 100 feet, you'll make it very difficult for marijuana businesses to locate in commercial corridors, just because the depth of our commercial corridors is narrow to begin with. And I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, you go down Sabatis Street and you know, in the Hannaford neighborhood, I mean, it's commercial, and then 2 blocks in, it's immediately residential. I'll stop there before I go any further.
Can, just for clarity's sake, the green line is how many feet?
100.
And the red line is?
50.
And the purple?
50 from the door of the residential use.
50 from the door. Okay, gotcha.
And that's what's currently drafted in front of you, and that's not good. I don't recommend you do that.
Are ready for questions?
Yeah, sure. I have more to talk about, but I figured it's a good spot to stop.
Councilor McCarthy.
If we go with 100 or greater, any idea how many businesses will be non-conforming?
I don't. I'd have to find that out for you.
And
For the
Question.
sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was gonna say for the benefit of others, when non-conforming, meaning something is grandfathered, it was legally permitted before we changed it. That's not the end of the world from a non-conformance perspective, because non-conforming uses can continue to be used as long as that use isn't abandoned. So after a 24-month period, if there was a non-conforming use that was abandoned, then it wouldn't be able to be reestablished.
One other question. Is this for just stores, or is this for manufacturing and commercial?
So it's going to depend on the zoning districts. So manufacturing, I don't think I actually provided the districts for you folks. It's a good question, though. We break down, so we don't make a distinction between adult use and medical. They're just marijuana businesses. So you either have a store, you have manufacturing, which could be producing edibles, or a bakery or something like that, and then grow operations. This would apply to all 3 of those marijuana uses.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Pease?
This kind of scenario, the place that was, this kind of scenario, the place that's on East Avenue in Sabatis, a fairly new one where the Elizabeth Ann used to be.
Yep.
That's a no conforming if you apply something like that.
I'd have to check, Counselor. Again, it's about measuring it and figuring out how that works. So, on the screen right now, that's Elizabeth Ann's there. And let's see, this is a residential district over here where the cursor is.
Yeah.
This is a residential district over here. So clearly, even though there's no residential uses here, we wouldn't measure from this, it would be from the residential use. So there's a house here,
Right.
we would measure 100 or whatever buffer size, let's just say it's 100, great, there's a 100-foot diameter circle around that. And we would do that for all of these properties to figure out, okay, does this become a permitted site or not at that point? And honestly, that's a lot easier for us to even do in-house using the GIS versus trying to measure out, door to door,
Right.
what that setback is.
Councilor Harriman, did you have something?
Well, I think my first question was answered was, if this did get changed, would any current businesses that don't conform, they would still be allowed to operate?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was a concern in 2019 when the council adopted changes at that time too, because there were a couple of uses that became non-conforming.
Okay.
Yeah, 'cause there's a,
Thank you.
Councilor Pease.
I think she had that before me.
Councilor Pease and then Councilor Scott.
Okay. There are several businesses in that basic area that would not conform. If you go to Sabatis and Russell Street, right? Go in there, if you go up further and you go up to, Sabatis Street again, but it's right
Urban
after
Grove.
the Chinese restaurant place.
Urban Grove.
Old Green Road,
Oh, just
Yep.
before that. That would not conform.
probably, and that was my point, similar to what's on the screen now. I mean, this is a very narrow commercial district. Most of our zoning districts are narrow. So, if we want to put greater control on the number of establishments in town, putting a buffer there is certainly going to accomplish that.
Councilor Scott?
Thank you. So that's what I was going to bring up. So if we do put a bigger buffer there and we go with 100, we'll say, I'm going to speak about my ward, Main Street, Outer Main Street. There has been conversation about a new one possibly going up on Outer Main Street, and I have had a lot of responses from residents in that neighborhood that are concerned because there is a huge residential neighborhood directly behind versus the other side of the street, which doesn't have quite as much residential behind, right? It's more land. This would make it so that there would be less stores in the community, or they'd be harder for stores to build or start new ones if we had a bigger buffer. And I will say that, I was on the planning board, and I was part of this conversation prior to even being on the planning board and helping some of the local marijuana businesses when this first came out. And so I've been part of this conversation for quite a number of years now. And I am hearing from a lot of constituents and people in the community that they are concerned about the number of marijuana stores that are cropping up in our community. And I kind of don't disagree. It's, to me, like a Dollar General and you know what I mean? We need business. This is good business for our community. But how much of this is going to help, especially with the existing businesses that have been great businesses to have in our community? The more we build, the less it's productive for them, and the more we have these marijuana stores all over the city. So I think it's something that we seriously need to consider. I would be in favor of a bigger buffer. Thank you.
Councilor Jelinas?
Thank you, Mayor. So, yeah, I mean, how many does the city need? And when I think about, between the grow establishments, the retail establishments, the manufacturing establishments, it's over 60 businesses in the past few years. So it's an industry that, is doing quite a lot of work. And the reality is we don't have people lining up to occupy these unoccupied spaces or to build spaces. That's the reality. So, I mean, I hear you and I agree we need to have some discussion, but people aren't banging down the doors, I am questioning the setback. So the existing standard for the number of feet between child development facilities, 750, changing that to a setback of 500 feet. Can you clarify for me if that's the same or more protected than the state regs?
Less protective.
It's less protected?
As a matter of right, the state starts at 1,000 and leaves it up to a municipality to reduce that number to as little as 500.
Thank you.
Councilor Clement?
I guess I would ask Mr. Hediger then, why don't we go to the 1,000?
We certainly can. I mean, that's up to the council. When we discussed this back in, I guess it was 2018, that was floated back and forth with the council at the time as to what would be an appropriate setback at that point. So, same discussion, different council.
Councilor Scott? Councilor Harriman?
Back to the question of the number of businesses. I know it can seem like a lot that we have right now, but has there been any issue with other types of businesses struggling to find locations to locate here? I'm just thinking, like, I'd rather see more marijuana stores than more empty stores, you know? Has there been any issue with marijuana stores crowding out other types of businesses?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm less sure about it from a retail perspective. From a grow perspective, we hear, you know, not just Lewiston, Auburn, but throughout the state that, you know, warehouse space, grow operations, they're taking up, you know, there's a shortage of warehouse space because of the industry. Or at least that's the word out there, because they're willing to pay for the spaces. It's a growing industry. So if there's anything that's probably maybe suffering maybe from an occupancy perspective or vacancy perspective, maybe warehouse space because of grows. I don't know that retail is a problem. I mean, there's plenty of retail space out there, right?
Thank you.
Councilor Lesser-Powell?
Director Hediger, how would this affect the mill setup? My understanding, a grow operation recently leased like 100,000 square feet, and right next, in the same area, they're going to have residential. That's the mill that just got sold, Continental.
If that's the case, they haven't applied for a license yet. There's a different mill where there may be a marijuana operation being pursued that doesn't have residential uses in it, so it wouldn't be a problem. But if they have pending licenses with the city right now, then they would be grandfathered, they would be non-conforming.
I guess I would agree with Councilor Jelinas. I'd rather see it increased away from the schools or educational, up to the 1,000 feet. I have no problem with that. And then after that, I'm a strong believer in the free market. We have a lot of buildings that these grow operations have taken over. Look at McDonald's. It sat there for how long and they're not growing much in that small space, so it's a lot of it's retail.
That's purely a store where the
Correct.
McDonald's
So
was.
we're looking at some of these places. The place on Russell Street that sat there forever and changed gas stations. Elizabeth Ann sat there for how long? These buildings are way too small for a grow operation. Even the Napa store on Lisbon Street, that's not bad, but it's still too small to be really effective. Not that I'm an expert in this field, but I just know a little bit about it. I believe in the free market and 50 feet. And if we have, well, another example, how many Dunkin' Donuts do we have in Lewiston, Auburn? Lord have mercy. Yeah, God bless them, they're doing fine, but it seems, you know, drive 200 feet and there's another Dunkin' Donuts place. Let the free market. If there are too many of them, they'll close down. But I'd like to see it increased to stay away from the schools.
Councilor Pease?
Mr. Hager, I have another question. Taking the Continental Mill for an example, and we say there's no residents adjoining it just yet. So we'll say they apply for their license, they get it, and they establish a business there, growing. What happens to the other portion of the mills in the back that are going to be housing? Are they going to be restricted that they can't do it because they're too close?
No. So if the business is already established, let's pick on the Continental Mill, and somebody wants to put a marijuana business in there, and there is no residential there now, and somebody comes in afterwards, that's fine. They may become non-conforming, but again, a lot of it's going to have to do with the zoning district too. So maybe to set people's minds at ease, the riverfront, the Continental is in the riverfront zoning district. It's not a residential zoning district. It doesn't even apply. We're talking kind of more like your suburban type areas as far as zoning districts. What the residential areas that maybe abut Main Street and Sabata Street, rural parts of Lewiston, where you're not gonna have any commercial activity anyway. I mean, this is really gonna be limited, like, your downtown districts, where along the river, where the mills are, Main Street, those aren't residential districts anyway. So if somebody wants to put a residential use right next to a marijuana business there, they just need to know that they're putting themselves next to that type of use.
So it's on the same idea as industrial and residential. You can build residential in the industrial area, but you can't put industrial in the residential area.
Sorta, in Lewiston, you can't put a residential use in an industrial zone, but there are some zoning districts where it does fit that pattern, where there are more intense commercial uses, and if you choose to put a residence next to a Cumberland Farms, that was your choice.
Thank you.
Councilor McCarthy?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm a little concerned about a marijuana manufacturing place down in our riverfront area where we have the park right there, and we have, to me, I would consider parks in the same restrictive area as schools and childcare because a lot of kids go there and play and stuff. So is it possible to change the setbacks and add parks to the schools and run the same setbacks as we do for the schools and childcare?
So actually, we do now. When you're looking at this first column here, where it references the schools, it also references childcare facilities, public parks, playgrounds, and recreational facilities. And those are defined by ordinance. So if you go, I believe that list, it's not in here. I know it's in a different section of ordinance because it's a section that the police department uses as well, where we actually list all of the parks. So maybe to address your concerns, Samard Payne Park, whatever setback it is that the council goes with, if it's 1,000 feet, then there would be a 1,000-foot buffer. We would just drop a circle on top of Samard Payne Park and say, hey, if you're within 1,000 feet.
From
Exactly.
the edge of the property.
Exactly.
correct?
And that's actually worked out. I mean, I think part of the reason you don't see more marijuana businesses on Lisbon Street is in part because of Kennedy Park and absolutely the Frame Plaza. The Frame Plaza has been, a roadblock for a number of establishments.
Yeah, I'm for allowing as many marijuana places that want to open up. I mean, we are free enterprise, and I don't think it's a council to limit that. But that being said, I'm all for limiting the areas they can be as far as increasing the buffer zones so that the density is lower and the places that they can put them are away from residential and schools and stuff. Thank you.
One thing I'm concerned about is, perhaps the unfair stigma of a marijuana business or grow operation. It's my understanding that grow operations, from reading this, they need to mitigate the odor. So at that point, theoretically, they should be a fine neighbor. And, I understand that neighbors might be concerned. But for instance, if there was a convenience store that sold alcohol, they probably wouldn't have the same amount of concerns. And so, yeah, I don't want to send the wrong message to businesses, be it marijuana operations or retail spaces or Dunkin' Donuts for that matter. So I am concerned about setting the buffers a little too restrictive. Is there a buffer right now for a establishment that sells alcohol?
No.
Okay. Councilor Scott, and then Councilor Pease, and then we need to keep pace. Or Councilor Clement, and then we need to Harriman, and then Clement, and then we need to keep pace.
Thank you. So kind of going along with that, on this first page of Appendix A there, the Article 12, so all the underlined, is that all new language?
It's new to the zoning and land use code. A lot of it is taken from the original Chapter 22, the original licensing section, but there are some tweaks in there to make it consistent with state law today.
Yeah, I was wondering specifically about the number 4 there, about the odor. Is that?
That's existing language.
So that's existing, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And we actually kept that language in the licensing section too. If there's a complaint we get about marijuana businesses, it's odor.
Okay.
And we don't get many complaints. We get complaints about someone who's illegally growing in a residential area, the odor. I talked to the police chief as well, just to get a sense, maybe planning and code isn't getting the complaints, maybe the police department is. And His sense is, marijuana businesses are not really an issue as far as the community goes.
Yeah, I was wondering because it seemed like that was kind of a, I don't know, kind of an arbitrary standard to say that this category of business cannot produce any odor at all, whereas there are many other categories of businesses who don't have such restrictions. But if it's already there and it doesn't seem to be a problem for these businesses already, then
I think
don't
for the
see a
most
problem.
part, they've been able to control it. There are times where we get a phone call and there'll be some reason or explanation. But to your point, they are held to a higher standard than other businesses.
Thank you.
Councillor Clement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would concur with what Mr. McCarthy just had to say. I like the idea of the 1,000-foot setback. In dealing with marijuana, I think the state has rushed into this way too fast. We have several areas that potentially provide a lot of problems. The operation of motor vehicles, there is no testing, no standard for what constitutes the influence of THC or whatever psychoactive drug is involved. Whereas alcohol, you mentioned, yeah, we do have measurable metrics for that. We have laws that encompass that. We don't have anything other than to say that it's against the law to operate under the influence of marijuana. Well, what's the measurable standard? I think we need to go at this a little slower. I think we have way too many of these businesses coming into town. And once they're here, it looks like for 2 years, whoever occupies that property is grandfathered. And, I'm not sure that the free market will even things out fast enough. I just think we're getting a reputation for being the marijuana capital of Maine, and I'm not sure that's where we want to go. Thank you.
Councillor Pease?
Now, when they're saying 1,000 feet, are we talking as the crow flies or past?
1,000
As the
feet
crow
from the
flies.
property line out.
Yep. So from the property line of whatever the uses that we're looking to protect,
Right.
whether it's a school, a playground, a daycare, 1,000 feet from that residential use in a residential zoning district, you wouldn't be able to have a marijuana business.
At this point, I think it might be helpful to, given this feedback right now, it's just to see how that might impact things on a zoning map. And then please proceed with the rest of your presentation.
Sure. Sorry, so, what else want to talk about? I think that's a good thing. The other thing that we've thrown in there, and it actually is a problem, someone kind of mentioned it, is we'd like to put a deadline in there as to when licenses have to be issued. We've had a couple of businesses, probably more than a couple, and part of this is given the current structure of our ordinance, where they apply for a license and then nothing happens for months and months, or maybe even a couple of years. They actually are holding up a space because they don't want to lose that opportunity for that space. So we're suggesting we put language in there that says upon applying for a license within 180 days, if your license isn't issued, it's denied at that point. That puts a little more skin on the game for those business owners, because one, they're not always contacting us. They apply for a license in the clerk's office, and then they don't contact planning, code, police, fire. They're not getting the inspections necessary. So this puts a little more onus on them to call us up. We don't have to chase them. We still will chase them, but maybe there'll be less chasing going around, because if they're operating without a license, then great, there's a consequence at that point. Versus now, I have an establishment that pending license since sometime in 2020. Are they operating? Are they not operating? They haven't called for an inspection. Maybe the building isn't even there yet. Part of this is complicated by the state's process, because the state has different paperwork for adult uses versus medical uses, and the state wants sign-offs from the municipality. So there's a little bit of a conflict there with the state, but we're suggesting putting some language in there that hopefully makes it a little more accountable for the business owners too, to make sure they actually get their license in a timely fashion. With adding some language in there that if an extension's warranted, we'll grant it to them. I mean, we're willing to give somebody additional time if, they're making improvements. And, we'll pick on the McDonald's site. If their license wasn't issued in 180 days, but clearly there's a building going up out there, okay, great, we'll give you an extension because you're making efforts to go towards, the business versus a vacant storefront for a pending license that's been sitting there for a year. They should they either applied prematurely, or they should come back in and go through the process again. To have a license application sitting there for that length of time doesn't seem to make sense to us. That's all I have for marijuana.
Councilor LaChapelle?
Director Hediger, I agree. I'd like to see it at least 6 months. Just an example, I was trying to get a heating system in one of my units. It's been a year since I've waited for the heating system. So if I was told I was going to have it in 3 months and I applied for my license, and I know you can say you can get that extension, but I'm still waiting a year later, waiting for rooftop heating systems because of supply chain or whatever the case may be. I agree with you. I think just give them a couple more months, make it at least 6 months with the option for an extension due to unforeseen problems.
Councilor Clement?
I guess currently, they apply, how long do they have before they have to?
Good question. There's no
There's
sun-
nothing, so you're
there's no
proposing
sun-
180 days?
Yeah, or 6 months, but some deadline in there that works. Right now, there's no sunset.
180 days, 6 months, not much difference, right? Okay, whichever. I just think some performance standard should be established. Otherwise, you've got people hoarding these places.
Councilor Scott, did you have something to add?
I did. So I just wanted to ask, Director, so this is going to go back to planning and code for are you going to look at the 1,000-foot around schools and that conversation to happen?
So I think
And
that's a big enough.
What's our next steps, I
Yeah,
guess?
good question. So I think it's a big enough change that we should bring it back to the planning board. I think I have some sense is from the council tonight that it sounds like we want to increase the setback from schools. Sounds like everybody's comfortable with eliminating the whole ordinary course of travel and doing a buffer from the property line. And I can tell you, I think everyone's going to appreciate that, regardless of where your position is on this. And the big one is the residential zoning district and the buffer along that to go potentially. I'm not sure there was consensus, but if we make that 100 feet versus the 50 feet that's proposed, that will limit establishments in town, no doubt about it. But it's not an outright prohibition as well. So it'll certainly slow down the number. And again, I don't know how many more of these establishments the community can sustain. I can tell you, I clearly get a phone call a week, somebody asking about a location. So.
The only, yeah, I understand. Well, I guess what I'm concerned about is I'd love to see, what you heard tonight, like on a map, so that way we can see. Because even though it might not be an outright prohibition, I mean, it could be a de facto one based on, how all the circles line up. That would be my only concern.
So I can certainly come back to you folks. So the way this is right now, there's an ordinance that's been recommended by the planning board. If this was a public hearing tonight, you folks would not approve it, right? There's too many concerns with it. You could certainly send it back to the planning board then and ask them to consider changes. So I think what we could do is make these changes potentially. I could come back to you folks if that is seems to be going in the right direction. Then we could bring it back to the planning board and ask them to reconsider those changes, and come back forward with a new recommendation to you folks. Okay. So I'll come back for another discussion on marijuana.
FERC relicensing?
Yes, FERC relicensing. I'll try to keep this one brief. You folks might have saw an article in the paper. Every 40 years, hydro facilities are required to update their licenses from FERC, from the Federal Energy Regulation Commission. Lewiston Falls, which is also known as Great Falls right here, Monty Hydro, that facility is up for relicensing. That process has started. Lewiston worked with the City of Auburn, American Whitewater, Appalachian Mountain Club, Grow LA, and Trout Unlimited to submit comments, and you have a copy of those in your packet. basically, there are certain things that a community can request. We can't, some people think, oh, they're just gonna give us money, or let's make them do something because they've created an impoundment in the community. That's not the way it works. You have to make a request for specific studies, and there are certain criteria that FERC has to take into consideration, and in this case, Brookfield, who operates the impoundment. We've made a request, you've seen that, we've highlighted aesthetics, river access, recreational flow, and dissolved oxygen, which is basically the water quality issues that you folks have probably heard about. So that request has been made. We filed basically a joint request to Brookfield and FERC. As you can see, there's a kind of like a schedule that gets followed here. This is not a fast process. The license will not be renewed until sometime in August of 2026, probably. So I'll probably be back before you folks or another council with updates as to how this goes forward. But my understanding is that they'll take into consideration the requests that have been made by different agencies like the cities, and there have been other agencies like inland what am I trying to say? Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, DEP, there's a number of agencies that have all provided comments similar to us. Those will all be taken into consideration. They'll come back with potentially preliminary studies to say, hey, we think this is warranted. We think aesthetics is a rational request, and we will try to do a study for that. And there is some negotiating that goes on here, but at the end of the day, FERC is going to kind of advise as to how extensive the work has to be done in these studies. A study may result in mitigation. The examples I would give is from when this last license went through the process is West Pitch over in Auburn. That was something that was done at the time by CMP when they controlled the impoundment. The Auburn boat launch and the Durham boat launch too. Those were all mitigation measures that were taken. So depending on the outcome of this whole process, there could be mitigation measures that the city may benefit from. The impoundment area basically goes from the pedestrian bridge to Deer Rips. If folks know where Deer Rips is, it's not quite Gulf Island, but going up that way. So that's the area that you can ask for mitigation to be outside of that area, and we've kind of suggested that given the canals and the influence that the dam has on the canals and the flows on that. So there may be some potential there as well. But right now, we're kind of in a waiting pattern or a holding pattern to hear back from either FERC or Brookfield as to the next steps.
So we have proposed these 3 studies, and we're waiting to see if, for approval for the studies.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. And what those studies may consist of, we don't know. I mean,
And the level of study is what you're saying?
exactly, yeah,
Okay, the
exactly.
depth.
Is this gonna be
Okay.
a super high level or something like that? Or are they gonna get
Right.
into the nitty and gritty? Where are we looking at? So we'll
And-
learn more about that as the process goes forward.
And when would we hear back about the approval?
So, I mean, the way the timeline that was provided to us, between April of this year and March of next year, they'll conduct studies that are reasonable and necessary, and then there's another opportunity for studies after that. So they're taking all this information right now, they're digesting it, figuring out what they need to do, and whether or not they're actually gonna do the studies and how extensive they'll be. So once we hear back from them, I don't know whether it'll warrant a workshop, but certainly I can give administration and you folks just a heads up even as to where we are in the process and any new developments.
Councilor Herman?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I appreciate these comments. I attended virtually the previous presentation about the relicensing, and I especially agree with the issue of not having any water flow over the falls, and as well as adequate water flow through the canals. I think those are both really big resources for us, and we should do whatever we can to get those, to make those things happen.
And I should note, I mean, this is certainly not my work alone. Between my counterparts in the city of Auburn and those other organizations I referenced, this was a collaboration of getting everybody in there, because there's some people that are very more familiar with this process than I am, so it's been somewhat of a learning curve here as to, what happens every 40 years. I'm good.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
We will now have a presentation on the Economic Development Committee, and I will join Mark Lee at the table. We're doing updates. We're doing updates while we're doing updates. Not a problem. The first slide was that, yes, we have a mayoral committee on we have a mayoral committee on economic development, and I'm very happy that Mark Lee is the co-chair. For those of you that don't know Mark, he is the managing partner for Harriman Associates, an architect. And I've known Mark for quite some time. He did not hesitate. He said yes right away. And, Mark has worked on projects throughout New England and the country. And, brings an incredible breadth of perspective and experience. And I look forward to leading this committee with Mark. Just a couple questions, or just a couple, intro statements here. So, why do we need an economic development committee? Why do we need economic development? Without economic development, we do not move this city forward. We need investment, and we need jobs. Two reasons why we need this committee. We need a fresh look, a fresh perspective. This is our chance to rethink how we do things. And then we can also take this opportunity to involve the business community. It's going to be, the work on economic development will not be able to be completely done by the city alone. We will need the business community to join with us, and I'm looking forward to it. The committee members, that was also a slide. The committee members are listed on the website, and they represent diversity of industry and diversity of individuals. We have, we wanted, no matter what topic we were discussing, we tried to have somebody there that represented that either industry or that experience. And some are not just there because of industry. For instance, John Grenier is there, and he represents a business that moved from Auburn to Lewiston and comes to the table with that experience. There we go. Our committee members. I'm very honored that they all have agreed to serve. This is the committee as it stands now. We might have one or two more individuals joining us. And then, as the case may be, there will most likely be subcommittees, and those will have committee members. I'd like to turn it over to Mark.
I appreciate it very much, Mayor Shalene. Thank you very much, and I'm pleased to join all of you this evening. I'm a resident of Lewiston, have been for 25 years, raised my family here, and have worked in the community. So I take a great deal of pride in living here. We see across the state a lot of communities where we do see a great deal of economic development. We see the changes that have been happening in Biddeford, in Waterville, in Westbrook, and we know we have a great community here. And so my interest is in really driving forward as much as we can economic development. And so the slide here identifies sort of the four basic steps that we're following with the committee in terms of the work that we're undertaking. The first one is underway right now. In fact, we're probably nearing the conclusion of it, and that's the planning initiation. So we've got, we've formed the committee. We're having our first meeting tomorrow, and so it's exciting to start that underway. We've already actually begun a survey of those individuals that Carl identified on the committee to understand their perspective of where are we and where do we need to go when it comes to economic development. And through that effort, tomorrow in our meeting, we'll start to establish the mission and goals of the collective group and where they see the important areas to be addressed. We'll also review what has been done and is currently being done when it comes to both the framework of studies as well as initiatives on when it comes to economic development across a broad spectrum of aspects that relate to it. The second piece really is rolling up our sleeves and getting into it, and so that's the strategic planning itself, and that is the sort of monthly work of the committee, and it'll be digging into a good level of detail on the topics, a wide range of topics, so whether it's education, workforce development, housing, real estate. We'll be looking broadly at a lot of issues and focus on those monthly, and as Carl said, we'll look at the need for subcommittees to dig into those subject areas even further. We plan on being back before you to provide you quarterly updates, and so you're aware of what's being done on the direction that it's going, and so it's some opportunity for you to provide us feedback as well. The third leg of this is really not just it becoming a planning study, but to actually get out into the community and realize what the opportunities are. And so we anticipate that there'll be a number of forums or community engagement where we can actually look at various considerations for implementing community development. So it's not simply, again, just a abstract study that gets handed off. And then the last one is the fourth is the planning framework itself, and that is pulling all this together to provide a roadmap or a guiding document that serves both council, staff, development, the community, and looking at how to guide economic development moving forward. And so that those 4 steps we endeavor over the course of the year to undertake that. The next slide just highlights kind of how we see that rolling out. And so the planning initiation, as we said, is undergoing right now. That'll finish up in the next few weeks here, and then we'll be well into way on the strategic planning itself. The planning, the community engagement, the stakeholder component, we anticipate that being after we've really invested some level of effort in understanding what some of the salient topics to explore with the community are. We anticipate that to be 5 or 6 months or so, right in the middle of the calendar year. And then wrapping it up in terms of putting a time frame on things, but and making a deliverable of a planning framework towards the tail end of the year in December. And so that's kind of our roadmap for our work right now. We're really excited, looking forward tremendously to tomorrow and kicking this off with the group and being able to see where the opportunities reside for us to make a difference.
Questions or comments? Councilor Jelinas?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have any questions, but I have some comments. I want to thank you for, I'm aware of the diversity of the committee that you've put together. There's a lot of thoughtfulness that went into that, and so I appreciate that because it does represent a broad spectrum. You know, I agree that economic development needs a fresh perspective, so that's, you know, it's good to hear you say that. You know, as a founder of a business here locally, someone that's lived here my entire life, you know, I think that this is such an important thing. And what I really applaud you for is really looking at some community engagement to get this, you know, going. That's going to be such a big piece here. It's more, like you said, than just the city. It's really pulling in some community members. I look forward to the quarterly reports. I look forward to the rollout of the strategic plan. Thank you for the work that you've at least started.
Councilor Scott?
Thank you. I would agree with my cohort, Councilor Jelinas, that this is a good thing to have going. A couple of things that I would like to say, though. So first off, I'm very glad that you said that you were going to have quarterly reports, because I was a little concerned when I saw a report out in December. I'm looking at this going, we need this now, right? Because we all know we need this now. But looking at your list of membership, I would hope that we have somebody sitting in our audience tonight who is in our Economic Development Department, Misty Parker, who is an incredible person on economic development, and I'm
Do you mind
hoping-
if I interrupt you very quickly?
Yes.
I apologize. So, yes, in putting this together, I neglected to mention the city staff that serve on this committee. Administrator Hunter serves on this committee. Deputy,
Assistant Economic and Development and Community Development Director.
yes, Misty Parker also serves on the committee, as does Doug Green, our city planner. And I apologize for their exclusion from the slide. That was inadvertent. Sorry, please continue.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification because I think it's extremely important we can come together in a committee and have all kinds of ideas, but we need to look at the person who does the job every day when we're talking about Misty Parker and ensure that we are hearing exactly what somebody that is qualified to do this work really thinks is the important thing for our community and not just what business owners think is important for our community. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
We need input from all sides. And if I'm allowed to say, yes, Mark talked about a survey, and Misty Parker has already filled out the survey. So thank you, Misty. Councilor Pease.
Is there any way we can get a written basic report prior to the meeting? So we can have a chance to review it, look it over, and maybe develop questions on it?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
This concludes the workshop. We will take a few minutes and then reconvene for the council meeting very shortly. Thank you. Hello, welcome. We will stand for the pledge, and Alicia Ray, will you lead us? If you could please remain standing, we will have a moment of silence for Michael Bolduc, Public Works employee who passed away recently. Thank you. Madam Clerk, we are ready to begin.
Great. All roll call votes for this meeting will begin with the Councilor of Ward 2.
May we have a motion to accept the minutes?
I'll make a motion, we accept the minutes.
Councilor
So,
Pease,
second.
Councilor Clement, second.
And if you're all set, we can call the roll.
Please.
Sure, Councilor from Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
Ward 1.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
At this time, we will now have public comment period. Any member of the public may make comments regarding issues pertaining to Lewiston City Government, 3 minutes per speaker. And for public items, this period is reserved for non-agenda items. Public comment is also allowed during individual agenda items. Because this is the business meeting of the City Council, all questions should be directed to the mayor, who asks the staff to follow up at a future time, and it is illegal for City Council to allow comments related to personnel matters. All personal complaints should be made directly to the administration office. Do we have anybody for public comment? Seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda.
Sure,
Madam Clerk?
there are 2 items on the consent agenda this evening. Item number 1, order authorizing execution of municipal quitclaim deeds for real estate located at 81 College Street and 1006 Sabata Street. And number 2, adoption of city council meeting schedule for the months of July and August.
Move for passage, Mr. Mayor.
Second?
Councilor Clement and Councilor Pease. Call the vote.
Counselor from Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
and Ward 1.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll move to item number 3.
Item number 3, public hearing on a renewal application for a special amusement permit for live entertainment for Baxter Brew Pub LLC 120 Mill Street. Requested action to grant a special amusement permit for live entertainment to Baxter Brew Pub LLC 120 Mill Street.
So moved.
Second.
Councilor Jelinas and then Councilor LaChapelle. Discussion from the council. Discussing, any member of the public wish to make comment? Back to the council. Call the vote, please.
Counselor from Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
and Ward 1.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Item number 4.
Item number 4, public hearing and first passage regarding an amendment to the Cable Television Ordinance to eliminate the Cable Television Advisory Board. Requested action that the proposed amendments to the City Code of Ordinances, Chapter 24, Cable Television, Section 24-20, Cable Television Advisory Board, receive first passage by a roll call vote, and that the public hearing on said ordinance be continued to the next regularly scheduled City Council meeting.
Move for passage.
Councilor Clement, do we have a second? Councilor McCarthy? Discussion by the council. Public comment? Back to the council. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counselor from Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
and Ward 1.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Item number 5.
Item number 5, order approving a 7-year and 6-month lease agreement at the Lewiston Armory between the Boys and Girls Club of Southern Maine and the City of Lewiston. Requested action to approve the order authorizing a 7-year and 6-month lease agreement at the Lewiston Armory between the Boys and Girls Club of Southern Maine and the City of Lewiston.
So moved.
Counselor Harriman, Counselor Jelinas. And do we have a presentation?
Yes, we do.
Please, if everyone could please state their name and where they're from.
My name is Gary Violet. I'm the director of the Boys and Girls Club in Auburn, Lewiston.
Nicole Welch, Recreation Director, City of Lewiston.
Hi, good evening. Karen McDonald, Chief Operating Officer with Boys and Girls Clubs of Southern Maine.
And we are here to discuss a lease agreement between the City of Lewiston and the Boys and Girls Club. So right now, the Lewiston Armory has a roughly 1,700-foot vacant space that is currently unusable due to construction concerns, electric, asbestos. There's a variety of reasons that we cannot use that space as a recreation department. However, that space would make a really perfect space for a teen center, and other youth engagement kind of programs. We've partnered with the Boys and Girls Club, who currently have a well-established club in Auburn, and they actually currently serve a good portion of the club, which I'll tell you in a few minutes, is actually Lewiston students. So I'm going to pass over the microphone to them and give them an opportunity to share a little bit more about their programs and how that could serve the Lewiston youth.
Yeah, so currently we have approximately 500 members. More than half are from Lewiston. It's grades K through 12, and we've got to the point now where we have actually outgrown the facility we have in Auburn. And to divide the club would be logical to do so from middle school, high school, and then elementary. So we would maintain the kids from the Lewiston Auburn school districts through K through 6 at the current location, and then we'd like to open a teen center at the Armory. It's a perfect location. It's right next to the middle school. It's on the bus route from Lewiston High School, and I think that it would benefit both programs. A normal day at the Boys and Girls Club, I'm just going to go through a little overview, would be when members would come to the club. They would receive a healthy snack. They would transition into their pods, where they work from 45 minutes to an hour on their homework. From there, they would transition into art, music, recreation, or other activities that we have.
Mouse disappeared.
Right here?
Okay. Yep,
I thought you were going to do this part.
I can do it.
Okay.
I'll help you out.
So if you don't have a lot of understanding what the Boys and Girls Club are, they're a safe place for kids to go after school. It's typically a non-fund-based program. It's $5 for the entire year. We work on food insecurity, social awareness, safe spaces, mentoring programs, outcome-driven programs. So we would do pre-test and post-test for a lot of the programs that we have for the teens, whether it would be community activities or some of the Boys and Girls Club programs. And most of the programs that we run are based on age. So a couple of the programs that we would be doing with the teens would be Project Learn, Triple Play, Smart Girls, Passport to Manhood, Healthy Habits, College Readiness, Substance Use Prevention Strategies, and a basketball league. So some of the activities that we do, we actually partner with other community organizations, like the basketball league. We're partnering with Lewiston Rec and Tree Street. And we've also partnered with the YWCA for a swim program, so we're in the process this summer to try to teach 100 youth to swim through the Michael Phelps Foundation. So if you look at the picture, the current space that we have in Auburn is quite small. It can possibly serve 20 members. And what we're hoping is that number will increase exponentially if we moved into the Lewiston Armory. Yeah, we talked about how it's on the bus route. It's right next to the middle school, and a lot of our club members already go to the middle school, so it would help with transportation to the club. The yellow spaces are the rooms in which we would occupy. We're hoping to take down a wall or two, so we would have a couple of big rooms and a couple of smaller rooms. One would be for study, and another one may be for food distribution. Typically at the Boys and Girls Club, we service a snack each day and a healthy meal. And what we would do is we would transport the meal from the Auburn Club to the Lewiston Club to make sure that members would get a healthy meal.
And this space that we're speaking about on the screen, it's currently, like I said, it's currently unoccupied, currently unusable, and it's, has a shared entrance with our senior citizen programs, which works out well because the bulk of the senior citizen programs happens before 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The Boys and Girls Club programs, they won't be running until 2:30. So there will be some potential cross-generational interaction. But as far as noise level and programs and business of the hallway, there shouldn't be too much crossover there.
So the space that's on the left is the space at the Armory. The space that's on the right is an example of like our rec center in Portland, so it'd be similar to that when we're done with it. So this is where we're at right now, the approval from the City Council, finalized construction plans. We've got bids from Hebert Construction on some of the repairs, and also Dubois Electric. And these are just some of our club members.
Question, I'm sorry, please continue.
Say that again, please.
Any further presentation?
I don't have anything further than this now. I just was going to open it up to questions.
Questions from the council? Councilor Jelinas?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First off, thank you to the Boys and Girls Club for what you're doing. Your work is so important and valued and just needed. I'm really excited about the possibility, of this happening because I think that location couldn't be more ideal. That being said, I'm curious about, you've talked about like 500 registered members, and so I'm curious about how many of the Lewiston youth would be served at the Armory potentially. And then if I could go a step further and ask you, what is the ratio of supervision to the youth in that facility, if you could share that, please.
So it fluctuates from year to year. It's about 50% most of the time. When it's greater than 50%, it's more students from Lewiston than Auburn. We get a lot of referrals from the school departments that children may need academic support. So we would pick up, additional children at Connors or Farwell or other schools like that. So a lot of them are with recommendation for academic support. And also a lot of them are recommendations, whether there's food insecurity, they know that we, have access to supplying food and stuff like that. So it runs about 50%, except if it deviates, it's typically more Lewiston than Auburn. And it's right over the bridge, and I think a lot of it has to do with transportation. It's easier for a lot of the Lewiston families to pick up at the club, so.
Okay. And then the ratio?
Regarding staff ratios?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean the staff ratios?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
So typically in a pod, if we had more than 15 students, we'd add another staff. So we would have a full-time staff in charge of K through 6, okay, which would be, right now will be 3 pods. So we would have a full-time staff up to 15 members. When it surpasses 15 members, they would have an assistant. And because there's a carousel of events and pods move from, let's say, their pod to the art room or their pod to the gym, typically the only time that we would have 15 or more in one space would be during power hour, homework help, and when they're getting the healthy snack and when they're getting their evening meal.
Okay. But this facility, the Armory would just be housing 6th through 12th grade, is that correct?
I think it would be great. I mean, the way that I worked it out was we would tile one of the rooms, so when we had food come, we'd do a rotating schedule where we'd have, maybe, grades from the middle school eat,
7
and then,
yeah.
separate them that way. And we'll have 3 other areas in which to operate. We'll have a room at the other end, a large room. We'll have like a kitchenette, and we'll also have access to the gym. We'll try to get in the gym schedule.
Very good, thank you.
Councilor Scott?
Thank you. I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate this. I'm glad that we have a recreational director that's looking outside the box to use the building space that we have, and I'm proud to say that it's going to be the Boys and Girls Club. It's about time you come to Lewiston, in my opinion. Thank you.
Councilor LaChapelle?
Director, one of my concerns or questions I'd have, where it is directly on top of the senior room, you said they're both going to be using that same entrance.
Yeah.
Just concern on the interaction with that.
Yep.
Is there a possibility of making a separate entrance where the lift is, the elevator, to make another entrance for the seniors to go in there, to go directly into their room? What's the,
I'm not sure, excuse me, I'm not sure about making another entrance. So there won't be a lot of crossover between program interactions. Excuse me, the bulk of the programming right now for the seniors is happening between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. or so. With the school, so the Boys and Girls Club would only be operating on a school year calendar, so they wouldn't even be leaving school until between 2 or 2:30. And at that point, our senior citizen coordinator is all cleaned up for the day, and the room is pretty much shut down. Unless there's like a special event, such as like a potluck luncheon or something, there shouldn't be any reasons for seniors to stay later in the afternoon. So there shouldn't be any crossover regarding like hallway sharing.
so is this facility only going to be running during school calendar time, or is this year-round?
Well, if we did run a summer program, it would be a late evening program. The one we have right now, the teens would come to the club at 4 o'clock and leave at 7. So they might be like a basketball league or something like that. Typically, we don't have campers that it would be middle school, high and above. They would be, a teen program, separate from that. And some of those activities possibly could happen in the Auburn site because our camp ends at 4 o'clock for the K through 6. But I think that's on a need basis more than anything else in the summertime. School vacations, we may run out of one facility or both. I think that we're going to find, a common ground of what's feasible for both. If we have to transport 4 or 5 teens from Lewiston to Auburn to do that, we could possibly do that. We have in the past, so.
I'm all in favor of it. I just want to be respectful of the other groups that are meeting in that same facility.
I was hoping to use the teen center or the senior center as a resource also. We've had, relationships with other senior citizens, like in the one in Auburn where they do cooking classes and things like that with the youth that were in our programs. And I'd, be open to, communicate that too.
And one last question, and I guess it's for Administrator Hunter. Were all the concerns that we had earlier, insurance and all the other issues ironed out? And
Yes, they were.
clarify?
You will see, and I know the director's planning on reviewing the terms, and so I'll turn that over to her, but it was reduced to the 7.5 years. The insurance was included in adjusted to include the personal property replacement and so forth.
Thank you.
And thank you, that's a good segue to give you an update as far as some of those pieces we're moving. So when we originally wrote the proposal, we were expecting around a $50,000 total cost for the entire project, which would include the construction and the electricity. Given the pandemic times that we're in right now, that did come up higher than we thought it was going to be. So the electricity, we're still looking at about $16,000 for the construction. It came back at about 71. However, $10,000 of that was going to go towards asbestos mitigation, and we have some money in the Armory that is kind of reserved for those incidental costs, the unforeseen obstacles that we'd like to put towards the asbestos mitigation of that space. So instead of, we were originally looking at between 50 to 60. We're instead looking somewhere between 71 and 76,000. Which would also then extend the term out that way as well. With the original 50 to 60,000, we were looking at potentially a 7.5 to 9 year, rental in kind. That now bumps that number up to 11 to 13 years. Sorry about that. Nope, no problem, Councilor Pease.
Further comments from the council? Public comment? Any other input from administration?
No, I'm all set.
Back to the council? Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Sure. Counselor from Ward 2.
Yes.
Ward 3.
Yes.
Ward 4.
Yes.
Ward 5.
Yes.
Ward 6.
Yes.
Ward 7.
Yes.
And Ward 1.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your
you.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Item number 6.
Item number 6, order, repeal of order previously adopted entitled Directing that the creation of a charter commission be submitted to the voters in June 2022. Requested action, to approve the order, repeal of order previously adopted entitled Directing that the creation of a charter commission be submitted to the voters in June 2022.
Councilor LaChapelle,
Seconded.
seconded by Councilor McCarthy. Discussion among the council? Councilor Harriman.
I'm just not really sure why we are having this discussion in the first place. It seems like this was submitted to go to voters to ask whether they want a charter commission, and I'm not sure why we are proposing to take that voice away from them. Yeah, that's all I have right now.
Councilor McCarthy.
Well, it's my understanding that the review commission that we had, review committee, excuse me, reviewed the whole charter, and the changes that they proposed was the only ones that they really found that needed to be changed. They didn't see any other need to move forward. And so, you know, when you get into charter commission, you get expenses, you get attorney's fees, you get all of this. And if there's really no driving force behind the need for the commission, then I don't see the need to have one.
Councilor Scott.
So I was on the Charter Review Committee, and so we did discuss several things, and I want to put it out there first that there was a lot of discussion around community comments and getting the community involved in the conversation around this. And we did have quite a few responses from the community when we discussed this. One of the issues that came up was the difference between a revision and an amendment. And a revision would, in legal terms, according to the city's attorney, would push this towards a charter commission on some of the language that was being looked at, and versus an amendment which could be done by the city council to vote on to send those votes to the community, which is what happened in November. And there were 9 issues that were, I believe it was 9, right? That were brought to the community, and the community did vote on all of those and agree to those. So I don't necessarily have an issue with having a commission, and I understand, I went back and I looked at the city council meeting on October 5th of last year to see what everybody said, and some of those people are here in the audience this evening, and I wanted to see what the specific issue was around why they were looking to have a commission. Now, I remember that some of the things that were said is that they wanted to have more of a interest of the people in the community to be part of the decision-making and changing of the charter, and also the fact that the charter has not had a commission in 30 years or more than that, I think, maybe. Now, so I have a couple of concerns around this. So our charter specifically says that we start with a charter review committee and then move to a charter commission if need be. Is that correct? Or if the charter review committee suggests that a commission needs to be put into place? I want to make sure I'm understanding that correctly. Even being on the charter review committee, some of the language is still a little bit tough to digest.
Sure, my recollection is the latter, is that, as you said, as the charter review committee is reviewing and studying and looking at it, if the scope of the changes that they feel would be in order to send to the voters, then it would switch to a commission. I don't know offhand, I didn't bring the statutes with me, I don't think that's an automatic, that may still have to be a vote of the citizenry, and then they would be selecting the commissioners. The commissioners are elected by the citizens, not appointed by the council. And it's usually, I think, a 2-year process.
Right. So, in thinking about this, so it took, so the charter review needs to be reviewed per charter every 10 years, correct? And I know one of the things that came up in the October 5th meeting was in changing, instead of going from a review committee to a commission automatically. I remember that being part of the conversation that was had. And My concern with having a charter review, and I understand where people are coming from, that they want to have this in June, and it's already been voted on by the last council. And I would have no problem with that being done if that's done during the primary of the school, or the school validation vote. So there would be no additional cost to the city to have that vote. Is that true?
That's not entirely correct.
Okay.
So the a vote in October was to send it to the June election, which would be June 14th, which is in conjunction with the state primary.
Primary, okay.
On June 14th for the state primary, we do not currently have a city election, so we would save costs by not hiring additional election workers or opening additional polling places. That cost would be covered as far as the city has already budgeted for that for the state election. The additional cost would be printing city ballots, because we don't have a city election that day. We don't have a municipal specific election today. So it would be printing the city ballots. It would be having the additional 8 additional voting machines programmed to tabulate the city ballots. And then the additional cost for postage for mailing out a second absentee ballot in an envelope. So there would be some cost that would already be absorbed because we're running the state primary election, but there would be other costs that we would have to cover independently.
Thank you. And if I may continue, Mr. Mayor?
Please.
So this was one of the things I wanted to make sure that we were clarifying for the public. Is there going to be a cost to have this vote? Because what this vote would actually be doing is just asking the community if we want to have a commission put forward, correct? And that, so it doesn't guarantee, the city could actually vote no, right? So citizens could vote no on that. So one of my concerns is if it takes 2 years, and one of the things that the citizens just voted on in November is for staggered terms. And that starts when?
So the staggered terms would begin in November, what year is this, 2022? So the staggered terms would be, the election would be in November 23.
Right.
All of the seats would be up, but half would be for 1 year and half would be for 2 years. Did I describe that right? Yes. So November 2023, all the positions, no, am I describing that wrong?
2 and 3.
3 and 2.
We,
2 years and 3 years, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
that was
Okay.
my understanding as
Okay.
well.
Then there you go. So, but it would be, everybody would be up at the same election in November 2023, but the terms would just be different.
Okay.
Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So that's going to be, so I'm bringing these things up because I want us to understand around what, this might be confusing to some of the citizens in the community. We're going to be going through what staggered terms and understanding where that goes, while we could have a charter commission that's going to come in and change every single thing that the Charter Review Committee suggested and what our current charter states. Is that correct? Because a charter commission can put something completely different forward?
They would have that authority.
They have that authority, and the citizens could vote on that, so it'd be another whole change of everything. It may not, the staggered terms may not stick, and some of the stuff that was brought up by the Charter Review Committee may not, could all be changed.
That would be their purview if they wanted to propose that, yes.
So, I am not in disfavor of having the citizens vote on this. And if they decide that they want to have a charter commission to look at our charter, they can vote yes, they could vote no. I don't have a problem with that. I think it's actually important that we make sure that our citizens have a voice in these things. But I want to reiterate that they did have the opportunity to be here tonight to talk about it. They had the opportunity to speak up when the city council talked about it a few times last year when it was brought up. And they had the opportunity to bring it up during the Charter Review Committee's work throughout the whole summer. And the only people that brought it up besides one citizen was city councilors to bring it to a commission. So I just want to make sure that we're understanding that, and if we're going to agree to put this forward, what it could do. I'm kind of just laying everything out there that I know about this and where it could go. And now I would welcome everybody else to talk. Thank you.
And thank you, Councilor Scott. Administrator Hunter, just for clarification, or Madam Clerk, so the Charter Commission could propose changes, but those changes would then need to be voted on.
Yes, that's correct.
Right, so things could be, basically, everything's up for debate, but any proposed changes would then need to be, essentially passed by another community vote.
That would be correct.
Thank you. Further comments from the council? Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. The one, during the past election, the one complaint I heard over and over and over and over and over while I was standing outside the polling booth welcoming our voters was when they came out, what were those 9 questions? Where did those come from? I had no idea what I was doing. I just voted yes. So I don't think, unfortunately, I don't know, I don't even remember seeing them in the paper, and I usually read the paper, but I was unaware of them until I saw them on the ballot. So to think that the electorate, the bulk of the electorate would even know what the Charter Commission does, or having a Charter Commission, what that would, how that would impact, I don't know. After hearing all of the complaints over those 9 questions, I just, I don't, and the fact that I don't think there was any glaring things that came up during the charter review, that I think it's a wasted effort.
We will now have public comment on this. When you come to the podium, please state your name and your address. Thank you.
Hi. Luke Jensen, Ward 5, 11 Sylvan Avenue, Apartment 2. For context, I am a former city councilor. So the resolution that was in the council packet, I found quite alarming. One, because I didn't hear about this until Sunday, and this is a very big decision, so I'm very disappointed that it wasn't marketed a little bit more. The fact that you're bringing it up at the second meeting, there's plenty of time for you guys to talk to your constituents about this. The second meeting? So just to provide some actual context on this, the previous city council was elected. The public knew that that council was the one that would be dealing with charter changes, the review committee and any decisions made then. The public knew that those people would be making those decisions, so they voted on us knowing that. They didn't vote on you guys knowing that. When they voted for you, they knew they'd have a vote on the charter commission in June. There was no hint that you guys would try to overturn the decision. None of you campaigned on that. So elections do matter, and so that would have affected my vote. I voted for you, Councilor Pease. If I knew that you didn't support a charter commission, I would not have voted for you, and I would have urged everyone I knew not to vote for you. I strongly, strongly urge you to vote against this, please. To provide actual context on this, so early 2021, we knew it was a charter review year. By charter commission, or by the city charter, we have to have a charter review committee. We knew that that was going to happen no matter what. Several of us councilors expressed a desire to make changes that we knew a review committee could not do, like add at-large council seats, for example. We knew all along that we would need a charter commission. So to us, we didn't really, it was a very confusing time, and there's a lot of frustrations, quite frankly, the reason I resigned from the council. It's a very unorganized system. But I was under the impression that steps would be taken so that voters in Lewiston could vote in November of 2021 on to form a charter commission or not. And that we would go ahead with the review committee, and the review committee would do what they can with the time that they had. Okay, great. Fast forward to the deadline for us getting the ballots printed. To find out that there's no plan in place to get it on the ballot in November. So when we're talking about these extra expenses in a June ballot, it should have been done last November. These extra expenses, we shouldn't be having this conversation. They're not an actual reason to go against this when it should have been done last November. So it was very frustrating. As a counselor at the time, I wanted to put up a big stink and just kind of say, no, we expected to have a charter commission vote in November, and now it's not happening. But, as we kind of do, we have to work together. We have to compromise. We're human beings. It's a tough time, pandemic. And so it was okay. We're going to move forward with what we can put on the ballot now. We'll focus on the recommendations of the Charter Review Committee, and then we'll vote as a city council later on the Charter Commission. That's what happened October 5th, and the council approved that. The council that was voted in by voters who knew that they would make charter decisions. And so a lot of this wasn't said at the October 5th meeting. I was in sweatpants. I had half a mind to come down here. I was just exhausted. and I know I have 8 seconds left here, but the story that you guys all have about this narrative, don't rush this. You have time. Postpone this vote if you can. There's no rush for this. Wait a few weeks and talk to us. Talk to more people. Get more information. You guys do not have all the information. I tell you as a former city councilor, you don't. Please postpone this vote and do not end the vote next June, please.
Hi, folks. My name is Alicia Ray. I am a Ward 3 resident. And I want to start by first thanking the members of that Charter Review Committee, Ed Barrett, Patty Gagne, Francis Gagnon, Steve Morgan, Roger Philippon, Linda Scott, and Jennifer Williams. I think incredible work was done, and there were so many efforts to solicit feedback from the community. But we do also have to recognize that that work happened in the middle of an ongoing pandemic. I see we're all back in masks tonight. It's been a tough time. Some people still have barriers to accessing the internet. Some people still have barriers to coming here in person. From all angles, people are under pressure right now. So onto this agenda item, I really urge the City Council to vote no on this item. The members of that Charter Review Committee were chosen by the former mayor, not by the council, by one singular person. And I respect and admire that person, and I respect and admire the folks who are on it, but those are very narrow views. The ability of our citizens to choose their representatives for such an important undertaking is of the utmost importance to me as a citizen. I think our citizens need to choose for themselves if they would like to be represented by this commission or not. Again, with all due respect to this charter committee that happened, as far as I understand, there were no folks of color, no LGBTQ plus folks, and most importantly, no one under the age of 40 on this committee. As was referenced earlier, the last charter commission was 30 to 40 years ago. We don't have the exact date right now, but I hope you can see why young members of this community are here to ask you to move this question forward and let the whole community decide. I personally believe that Lewiston's future is too important to take that option away at this point when it's already been moved forward, and let the public decide on their own representation based on their platforms for such a commission if they move that question forward. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Caleb Roebuck. I live on 49 Robinson Gardens. I'm a Ward 2 resident. So I'm here tonight to speak against repealing the previously adopted order to send the creation of a charter commission to the voters. I don't, excuse me, I don't think the reasoning for the repeal is sound, and that I believe if it were repealed, it would unfairly take away the voice from the people of Lewiston, that it strips us of a more open and accountable government, and it doesn't represent the wishes of the community. I'm incredibly appreciative of the work that the previous mayor and the charter committee did, and I think that it is pertinent that we build off of that work to continue to make progress in the previous discussions that have already been talked about on this issue. Some people did say it might be, kind of insulting to them to create that commission so quickly afterwards, and I don't see it that way at all. They worked incredibly diligently, incredibly hard throughout that entire process, and left a good foundation for us to build off of. And as everyone here knows, the work doesn't end when the meeting is over. There's always more to do. And when this was passed last October, we talked about the voters and their voices needing to be heard. Repealing this doesn't allow for that, and the current way the committee is established is pretty limiting for public involvement. And with a full commission, citizens can campaign for a seat, laying out their qualifications, explaining to the people of Lewiston their goals. Everyone here has the experience with that. And then the people can vote for or against them. And that process now doesn't allow for that and prevents a fully representative review. And if in June the voters disagree with this, then they can vote against forming the commission. But if it does get formed, we are taking another step forward in making sure the Lewiston government is accountable with more checks and balances and truly composed of by the people. In my limited time as a city councilor, I took part in several consequential votes. Some were contentious, some were unanimously supported. But the one thing that I was reached out to the most about was my vote for this order that was approved. And every single one of those people were thanking me for that vote. And the people of Lewiston want their government to be accountable, representative, and to evolve with the times. And creating the Charter Commission does that and allows our voices to be heard. Please vote against the order tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. Matt Roy, Ward 3. I'd actually point out all the 4 people speaking on this tonight are under 40 and have served in public office in the last 6 years. Mr. Mayor, point to my testimony I emailed on Sunday afternoon. As previous members have said, last October, the City Council approved an order which would resulted in a referendum question this coming June asking the citizens of Lewiston if a charter commission should be formed. As I stated then, and I again state now, I support a referendum question which would ask the citizens of Lewiston if a charter commission should be formed. Given the city charter has been in effect since January 7th, 1980. Again, this 40-year thing, it keeps on popping up. But anyway, as former Councilor Jensen said, or basically said, just over 3 months ago, and at the second meeting of the new council, this council was proposing that it knows better than the voters of the city who elected you barely 2 months ago, and you've been in office less than 2 weeks. It is a logical fallacy to state, as the Charter Review Committee did not have any pending recommendations for additional study, further suggested changes, or matters of unfinished business, a referendum for a charter commission is unwarranted. Per city charter, the review committee process has limitations, as the 3 former councilors have stated already tonight. And as I stated in October, a charter commission should be formed every 30 years. Again, this charter is 40-plus years old. It was adopted in June of 1979 with effect of 1980. And to a point, going back to the October meeting, I think that Mayor Kayer kind of had some confusion about this, the Charter Commission. The Charter Commission that came up during that discussion that night, that was about the merger of Lewiston and Auburn, not our city charter. Thank you.
Any further public comment? Back to the council for discussion.
By all means. Mr. Mayor.
Councilor LaChapelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the passion of the 4 people that got up and spoke. 4 people out of the 35,000 people that live in Lewiston. I appreciate those 4 people coming in. I can recall a previous council when they were asked to hold off a vote until the next year. One of the councils commented that that was their job and they can vote however they want at that point in time. That just happened this past December. Just because we speak loudly doesn't mean that it's true. The Charter Committee, I respect every individual that was on that Charter Committee. They have vast knowledge of the workings of the city, and I have faith in those people. If they'd have come back and suggested that we have a commission to the vote, that might have been a different story. My understanding that was not the case. Is that correct, Councilor Scott?
Correct.
Okay, so I have a lot of faith with those people. So I stand where I'm at right now and do support the repeal of this. And I agree with Councilor Scott. Let's give this, and let's enact some of these changes that are coming in right now. And it's going to be out of our hands. The next council that comes in, if any of us are still here, can look at how that's staggered and how some of these changes will take effect, and let's see what happens then. So I'm in favor of shelving this, just holding the commission, a full commission off for a few more years.
I would just like to add, if I may, Councilor Clement. So I've heard a couple comments about, people, I think in large part, this requires an enormous amount of education on, for the public to understand what's really going on and what's at stake. So I don't think it's fair for people to say people aren't asking for it, or people, they largely don't know. And, there was yes, I'm sure there was confusion as the amendments that were Am I using that term correctly, Madam Clerk? Those were amendments?
Yes, amendments to the charter, yes.
Yes, the amendments that were on the ballot this past year. Yeah, and there is likely more education could have been done. It's kind of arcane, and it's kind of hard for people to grasp. Yeah, I'd just like to keep that in mind. Councilor Clement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I recall that vote in October, there was a rather contentious discussion around the whole thing. I've heard here tonight that our charter is 40 years old and it's in need of complete overhaul. I would submit that our federal constitution is about 240 years old, and we're not overhauling that. We're not having a constitutional convention. Yes, indeed, elections do have consequences. And I think we should let our charter committee that put forth some very good recommendations, some of which I'm not in favor of, but I'm willing to give them a try, to set this up 6 months after they go into effect. It was January whatever that our new charter amendments went into effect. 6 months later, we're going to ask people, would you like to have a commission to redo the entire thing? Asinine. And I will vote against it. Thank you.
Councilor Scott?
Thank you. If I may ask, at any time, the citizens can put together a petition to have a charter commission. Is that correct on that? How does that work? If the city council were to vote in favor of this evening, the citizens of the city of Lewiston, if they wanted, could still get this process rolling. Is that correct?
They could, that's correct. That is defined in state statutes, not in the city charter, but there's a process defined in state statutes for that by petition, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
That was it. Thank you.
Just clarification. So if there was a no vote tonight, citizens could, in effect, get this on the ballot regardless?
They could. I do not know, though, if there would be enough time to get it on for the June ballot. There is a minimum number of signatures needed. I don't even want to tell you because I don't remember offhand, but it's all in the statutes. It is defined in the statutes. There's some time frames, yes, all in there.
Okay. Councilor Jelinas and then Councilor Clement.
I just wanted to offer a different perspective here. I definitely heard what you had to say, Councilor McCarthy, about some of the folks that were coming out of the voting. And it's interesting because when I think about that month leading up to that election day, when I look at my first 2 years in office, the time that I was most engaged with my constituents was when these amendments to the ballot came out. And it really was a lot of education, and they were so thankful. And I remember reaching out to Madam Clerk and saying, what's a great resource for me to use? Because they really wanted to be educated. They wanted to understand. I felt like I had the best interchange with my constituents during that time period of that term. This was after the vote. So we talked about the fact that, there was going to be a vote coming up in June because that had already been decided. And we talked about that at the ballots as well. So, it is a little awkward to be having this discussion now. I never really got a lot of frustration about, what does this mean? It was more like, help me understand this, So I think this is an opportunity for just more education, really, and not necessarily that they don't care.
Councilor Clement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think basically the differentiation here, state statute will control the Charter Commission. Our charter controls the Charter Committee. I believe the council has the authority under state statute to set up a vote on a Charter Commission, as well as the citizens have the right to petition for a Charter Commission. And that is all defined, I believe, in Title 30? Okay, so there is an opportunity out there. I just think we're rushing into it, and there's really no need of going forward at this time. Let's give our Charter Committee and their work product a chance to prove itself or disprove itself. We may decide anytime to establish a Charter Commission, and we may decide not to. It all depends on how things work out, but I do think it flies in the face of the Charter Committee to say, hey, we appreciate what you did, but we're going to see if we can't redo the whole thing. Makes no sense to me. Thank you.
Councilor Scott?
So as somebody that was on the Charter Review Committee, I don't feel insulted in any way if we decide to go to a commission. I just want to put that out there into the public. I really don't. We did an extensive amount of work, and we brought everything that we had discussed to the current council, but I will not be insulted if we go into the direction of having a commission. I just want to put that out there. Having said that, if we vote yes tonight, this puts this off the table for good in June. No more discussion, everything is done, correct?
Correct.
I would be in favor of tabling this until we get more public comment and hear more from the public if they are interested in this. I don't disagree that we do have some time before June. We meet enough that we could have more public input on this at this point, because I think it is important that we get public input. And I'm not saying that that changes my decision on what I would want to vote. I currently don't really see a need for a commission. That's my personal opinion. But I think it's important that we hear from the public as well, and not just the few people that are here that were part of the council last time. No offense, please, because I think you guys did great work, but I think it's important that we hear more. And we did give that opportunity to hear more, but again, as been stated before, the charter is a very complicated piece of paper, and it's not the easiest thing to understand. Even when you've gone to school for policy and public, right? It's just a very difficult thing to understand. And so I think that we do need to hear more from the public, and I would just offer if we could table this and bring them forward in the future. I know that there's already a motion on the table, so I'm just putting that out there.
And I, if I may, Councilor Herman, you know, I think any time we take a step to, you know, kind of deliberately undo something that a previous council did, I think we need to, you know, make sure this is really what's in the best interest of the community. And if we are, you know, taking this step, you know, and I understand, Linda, and I appreciate your feedback and value your feedback, having served on the review committee? Yes. Oh, okay. And, you know, but in fact, it's my understanding, Madam Clerk, that there's no other review committee member here this evening?
I don't believe so. No.
It may, yes, I would support Councilor Scott's suggestion that we get more feedback, and specifically feedback from review committee members. Is it possible do we have the names handy of who served? Do you mind reading it now, Madam Clerk?
I'm sorry, handy is, and I don't have them with me, but I believe they were mentioned earlier during a public comment. Yes.
Okay. Alicia, yes, please.
We've got Ed Barrett, Patty Gagne, Francis Gagnon, Steve Morgan, Roger Philippon, Councilor Scott, and Jennifer Williams.
Yes, if we were, yes, taking the step to undo something that the previous council has already voted to move forward, I think it would be prudent to hear from them. Councilor Harriman, I believe you had something.
Yeah, I guess so far I honestly haven't heard a good reason to undo what the previous council approved. And as far as hearing from the public, I think we can hear from them when they vote on it in June, whether they want a commission or not. Yeah, I don't think that's too much to ask.
I know we've, thank you, Councilor Herman. Anything further? No, okay. Madam Clerk, you mentioned cost, and I know that's been brought up before, but is it my understanding that the cost in the grand scheme of things is nominal, or can we put a number on that, if we may?
Off the top of my head, it'd be under $5,000.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion? Councilors, do we, Madam Clerk, what would be the procedure for Councilor Scott's thought of tabling it?
Sure,
at this point.
Sure, Counselor Scott could make a motion. It would need to be seconded, and it would be to postpone this matter. We would maybe suggest on a staff level that a date be inserted in there potentially in the motion, but Counselor Scott could make a motion, and it would need to be seconded, and then that would be voted on by the council if they want to postpone this matter to a date certain.
Is there not a motion on the floor now?
There is. There is. There's a motion on the floor to approve the order that's printed in your book, which is to approve the order repeal of order previously adopted entitled directing that the creation of a charter commission be submitted to the voters in June 2022. But it is appropriate, Counselor, under Robert's Rules of Order, when you have a motion that's pending, which is this main motion, to have a substantive motion attached to it, which would be to table it to a date later.
Counselor Scott, what would you like?
I would make the motion that we table this, but I would like to make the suggestion that we do not wait for an extensive amount of time. Like, we give the opportunity to the public right now, a couple of weeks to, maybe at our next meeting, to weigh in on this, show up, and if it's, again, I think that we need to, I'd like to hear more from the public if they would be interested in having a charter commission. So I would make the motion to lay this on the table for now till our next meeting.
When is our next meeting, Madam Clerk?
That's, she wants the public comment.
So I apologize. So the next scheduled city council meeting is December 1st. I'm sorry, February 1st.
February.
Sorry, February
Okay.
1st. Sorry, Tuesday, February 1st would be the next regular scheduled city council meeting, Mr. Mayor.
Mayor,
Okay.
I would raise the issue that we're going to have a couple of counselors that are not going to be here for various meetings over the next 2 or 3.
I'm here the next two. I'm here the first.
It's the 1st of February. Councilor LaChapelle, are you here? Yes. February 1st?
When
Good point.
so am I understanding that we are not all here on the next council meeting?
I'm here on the first.
Yeah, everybody's here on the
We are.
first.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Was that a motion?
Do we have a motion?
That was a motion. Second.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I would second that motion.
Okay. We now have yes. Councilor Harriman, did you want to second, or did you have something to say?
No, Mayor, point of order, there's no, is that correct? There's no discussion after there's a table motion?
That's correct.
That's correct.
That just goes to a vote. There's no
Okay.
discussion at this point on.
You can have a discussion that pertains to the motion, so it would really be limited to like the date, because that's part of the motion.
Okay.
But other than that, you could not discuss the merits of the Charter Commission. It would just be the merits of the tabling and more specifically the date, because that's in that immediately pending motion before you.
Councilor Harriman, did you have something about the date?
Yes, my question would be, what would be the lead time that we would need to, the next normal election is in June 14th, I think it is. What would be the lead time that we would need to decide on this by?
I would say March, because we need to notify the ballot company about ballot layout and design. We need the actual wording of the ballot. We need to have the voting machines programmed, so March.
Thank you.
Any further discussions about the date? Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Sure. And just for clarification, it will be to, the motion before you is to table the matter to the February 1st meeting. Counselor from Ward 2?
No.
Ward 3?
No.
Ward 4?
No.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
No.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Ward 1?
Yes.
Motion failed by a vote of 3 to 4. So now the motion before you, Mr. Mayor, is the original one that's printed in your book.
Any further discussion on that?
Move the question, please.
Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counselor from Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
No.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
No.
And Ward 1?
No.
Motion passed by a vote of 4 to 3.
Item number 7.
Item number 7, public hearing and first passage to amend the zoning and land use code and map by eliminating the office service district and to rezone the affected parcels into low-density residential, highway business, industrial, or rural agricultural districts as recommended by the staff and planning board. Requested action to approve first passage to eliminate the office service zoning district and to rezone the affected parcels into low-density residential, highway business, or industrial, rural agricultural districts as depicted in the attached maps 4, 5, and 6, an ordinance amendment, and to continue the public hearing for final passage to the next regularly scheduled city council meeting.
Move for passage.
Councilor Clement, and then Councilor Pease, second. And, yes, we have Director Hediger.
Great, thank you. I probably shouldn't have shut off that computer on you, and I might need it myself, but I'll take my lead from you folks if we need to see maps. There's basically 3 areas of the community that are zoned office service. They've been zoned that way since 1988. The largest area being off Crowley Road. Office service is a non-residential zoning district. It doesn't allow any residential uses. If you folks have been out of Crowley Road, you'll notice that there's nothing out there but residential uses, and the conversation probably for the last 30 years is, why can't I have a residential use out there? City has made no efforts to put any type of infrastructure out there to encourage any type of non-residential development. It doesn't necessarily lend itself that well to non-residential development. There's a mountain, so to speak, Robinson Mountain out there. There's a lot of wetlands. It's not really easily land for commercial purposes. We've been talking to property owners out there for years. One of my excuses was, let's wait for the new comprehensive plan. The new comprehensive plan is 4 years old, and that plan said rezone the area to residential. So we're finally here to try to get rid of one of those things off the comprehensive plan list, and that would be the OS zone out in Crowley Road. There's another OS area that's around where Liberty Mutual was, large chunk of land there that's zoned office service. That immediately abuts the highway business district. That's in your attachment as well. In effort to, again, eliminate a zoning district, that area would be combined into the abutting highway business district. And then lastly, there's a spot off of Old Farm Road, out where Fire Slate Place is, out of College Street. Main Bucket was out there. That's just kind of an anomaly out there. It's a non-residential area all by itself, given the historic patterns out there. There's chicken farms. It's a super fun site with contamination. It's just this little spot, right? So what we're looking to do is the OS zone off of Crowley Road, largely make that all residential, combined with the abutting residential districts out there. But there's some cleanup around there, is expanding the highway business zones around it as well. If you look at that map, there's some areas that clearly make sense to make highway business. One of them is abutting the abandoned railroad track out there behind Foss Road Business Park. There's actually some developable land there. It's not easy to get to, but it would be developable. So we've actually taken some land and continued to keep that for non-residential purposes. And we've actually talked to that property owner, and he's interested in potentially doing something out there. What that may be, we don't know. The OS area by Liberty Mutual already talked about, that would remain non-residential. It just becomes highway business. And then the Fire Slate Place, it's not called Fire Slate Place anymore, is it? Old Farm Road, excuse me, that would become industrial. There's no magic fix for that, but that's really what's out there anyway. It's kind of a light industrial uses out there now, so it would kind of keep in pattern with what's there.
Just for clarification, so if I'm understanding this correctly, we're kind of getting rid of the OS district that really wasn't used to its intended purpose, and then reapportioning those districts into something that makes sense.
Correct.
Okay. Discussion from the I'm sorry, anything further to add, Director?
I guess other than this is a change similar to the marijuana discussion, where it starts off with the planning board. So the planning board heard this, they sent a favorable recommendation.
Discussion from the council. Councilor Clement.
Mr. Mayor, this basically is my ward, and I have no problem with it whatsoever. I think if we have nothing developed out there in 40 years, it's not apt to start right off. There is some good developable residential land. I know several people that live out there that are my constituents, and I think this makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Public comment. Back to the council. Anything further to add, Director?
Nope.
Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counselor from Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
and Ward 1.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7 to 0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Item number 8.
Item number 8, resolve, confirming adoption of the National Incident Management System. Requested action to approve the resolve, confirming adoption of the National Incident Management System.
Move for passage.
Councilor Clement and Councilor Pease. I noticed the memo from you, Deputy Administrator O'Malley. Any other further comments?
No, this is something that we've done. I think the last city council in 2018 signed this. This just reiterates the fact that the city of Lewiston will take part in this federal program, which we do anyways, and that it allows us to actually access federal dollars. Homeland Security grant money is one of the big ones that we get from taking part in this.
Excellent, thank you. Discussion from the council? Councilor Clement?
Just a question for Madam Clerk. Does this resolution require a signature of all councilors?
It does, and so Counselor Scott has the page to sign, so I know this is the first time we've done it for this council, so Counselor Scott has the original to be signed as soon as you vote, assuming it passes. She will sign it, she'll just pass it down the dais, and then Counselor Jelinas will hold it for us. Thank you, Counselor.
I believe we have a plan. Further discussion from the council? Public comment on this item number? Back to the council? Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counselor from Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
and Ward 1.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7 to 0.
Please proceed, Councilor Scott. We can continue while that's being signed?
Sure, yes. The next item is item number 9, reports and updates.
Anything, councilors? No, Councilor Scott.
Yes, I just want to report on the school committee meeting from last week. We had our first school committee meeting last week, and a couple of big discussions came up. One was around the OSHA emergency temporary standard and how that might impact our schools. We had a long discussion on how that was going to be handled. At the point that the discussion was being made last week, it was human resource that was doing all the work, and that was around having everybody show proof of their vaccination cards, and then further on, if there was testing and that sort of thing to happen. There was also conversation that if that were to pass by the Supreme Court, that they would have to go, there might possibly be some regulations coming down from BOSH, which is BOSH, which is the state of Maine Occupational Health Department. At this point, because the Supreme Court voted this down last week, this has now become a non-issue. It's not going into effect. And the date that was scheduled for the BOSH implementation or anything there has now since been canceled. So I'm assuming that this particular conversation at this point is done. The other discussion we had was around a school day waiver from the Department of Education. The superintendent brought this up, and I just wanted to explain a little bit that this was around, so there are some school districts in the state of Maine that already request a waiver, and those would be some of the districts up in northern part of Maine when there's an extensive amount of snow days. And this pushes the calendar, the school calendar, into mid-summer. And the superintendent, because of everything that the schools have gone through, particularly with COVID and some of the missed days, has asked the support from the school committee to discuss with the Department of Education. It's not determined as of yet to request a waiver so that the school year does not go further than what's already existing and the existing snow days that are already put in place. Because every school calendar has so many snow days added to the end of the year in case there are missed days. And those would count for, like, if there was a restricted day or something because of COVID and we didn't use all the snow days, those days would be used. But instead of going further into that, to give the teachers, the students, and everybody else, and the fact that it's 100 degrees in those schools in the middle of the summer and we're not going to school till July, The superintendent is going to go to the Maine Department of Education and ask for a waiver to not have to extend the calendar further because of missed days. Also, I don't know if everybody saw that Administrative Hunter had reached out to Superintendent Langley, as I had sent them all the questions that you had given me and the comments that you had made at our strategic planning meeting. I sent those both to Administrative Hunter, to the superintendent, and also the new chair of the school committee, and asked that we have a discussion and possibly a meeting, and I see that that is now being looked at and finding out when the best date to do that is. And I thought that might be the best way, because I could probably come back and get the answers and answer the questions, but it might be better that way we have a face-to-face conversation with the chair of the school committee and with the superintendent, so that they know those questions, but we could also ask more and really have a good conversation and open up that conversation prior to our budget conversations happening. So, that's that.
Administrator Hunter, do we anticipate having the meeting? I realize that the date hasn't been set yet, but we're anticipating having it by when?
I'm hoping we would have a date by the end of this week. We are looking at having a joint discussion at the Green Ladle is currently being discussed, and looking at perhaps a Thursday right after the workday is tentatively what we're looking at now. But that's not definitive yet. They're still working on scheduling.
I'm very excited by that, and I would like the record to reflect that I'm vegetarian.
So noted.
Councilor Harriman.
I suppose I could give a quick update on the Housing Committee. We met last Thursday, and this is a fairly new committee, just a couple years old or so, and one of the big action items, I suppose first I should say we elected a new chair. Amy Sanchez is the new chair, and the big action item we're looking at is the ordinance that defines what the Housing Committee is responsible for, and just looking to see what makes sense, and any changes that people suggest, and then whatever we decide will come before the council, as it's an ordinance change, and then the whole council will weigh in on that. So that's all I have for Housing Committee.
Councilor LaChapelle, did you have an update?
Just a question for Councilor Scott, if I may.
Please.
Have they even thought of eliminating one of the school vacations? April, February?
I have not, as of this time, I've not heard that conversation come up. Again, we just had a first meeting. That was our first meeting last week, so I don't know that conversation has come up at all, and that was not brought up last week.
We're just so behind. This has taken such a toll. I'd like to see our kids in school more, not out of school. And just the April vacation would seem like I'd rather see them in April than at the end of June.
I would be happy to bring that up to the, I will bring that up. Thank you. I would also recommend that if you have thoughts like that you are more than welcome to pass that along. I would email your representative to the school committee as well and let them know what you're thinking, because I think that's important, that I can pass along what you say, but I think it's important that you have that communication with your fellow school committee member in your ward and pass that, what you're really feeling about different things along to them, so that they can bring it up as well. Thank you.
Councilor Clement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor LaChapelle's put himself out there on the limb. I have a choice of cutting it off or going out there with him, and I'll go out there with him. I'm concerned with the effect that the last couple of years has had on children. I have grandchildren. I see what's happened to them with this virtual learning, and we are going to be so far behind. We're going to lose a generation. That's all I'll say about that. Updates on committees. As no good deed goes unpunished, your Finance Committee saw fit or otherwise to re-elect me as chair this past meeting. We are still down one meeting. We're waiting for an appointment to fulfill our full complement of members on the Finance Committee. Our next meeting will be this coming Monday. It'll be at 5:30, Adams Avenue at the Public Works Facility. E911 Committee, first meeting of the year, will take place virtually this Thursday. Then Your Honor and myself will be tied up for the rest of the day with the MMA Legislative Policy Committee, and that should pretty well round out the week, I think. Although I don't know that there's going to be anything vegetarian or otherwise on these virtual meetings, so unless you bring your own. But
There will be where I am. Councilor Pease. Please speak into the mic.
Keep forgetting. This is for Councilor Scott. You can let the school superintendent know that I'm in favor of what he's requesting, to not extend it any further than what we have now for the school year. But I also second the fact that Mr. LaChapelle, Councilor LaChapelle said, we should try to find some way of eliminating some times off. April vacations, that sounds like a good one. If you keep pushing it, making the ski year longer, I don't know about where you work or where other people work, they have to let their boss know a year in advance almost when they're going to take their vacations. A lot of times it's as soon as the kids get out of school, and that really messes their schedules up.
More feedback from Councilor Scott?
So again, just to reiterate, I appreciate the comments that you're making, but I would also push the fact that it is really important that any opinion that you have, you pass that along to your school committee representative in your ward. And I will tell you that I have full faith in what our superintendent is doing. I am very happy of the fact that we have a superintendent that is very well aware of what is happening with our students and with our staff. And again, just if you have more to add, and I won't hesitate to add everything, because I write it. You have your own notebook, city council and school committee, that I write down. I learned this from Councilor Ray, watching her do it, but I think it's important because I do write down everything that is said and pass it along to both you and them. But I think that it's really important that you have that conversation with your fellow school board member. Thank you.
Any other, Councilor Jelinas?
Just real quick, the Lewiston Area Public Health Committee met, for the first time last Thursday, and, spent some time brainstorming the prioritizing what are some things we're going to work on, and there's many things, but some of the things that rose to the top were certainly looking at mental health of not just our children, but our teachers during this time and the toll it's taken, so we'll be outreaching Superintendent Langley as well. Also looking at getting more information as it pertains to homeless youth. So we'll have someone from New Beginnings coming to speak to our group, as well as the program, and forgive me, Councilor Scott, I can't remember the name of it, at Lewiston High School, the store next door. Is that right?
Store next door.
Store next door, okay, great. So, I'm trying to get some information there, and I'll continue to report back to the council on that. And then just real quick follow-up, I think to your point, Councilor Pease, teachers often have, vacations planned, like you said, in June, but just for folks to keep in mind, and the majority of my friends are school teachers, and they're all going away in February and April, so it'd be a great idea to have the kids, but someone's got to teach them, and, they're going to be gone. So just something to think about.
Item number 10.
Item number 10, any other business counselors or others may have relating to Lewiston City Government.
Seeing none, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Pease and, Councilor Pease and Councilor Jelinas. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counsel from Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
And Ward 1?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Thank you, everybody, and good night, Lewiston.